Welcome to Town Meeting TV's coverage of the primary elections. Polls closed last night at 7 p.m., and we have some results in the key races to share with you. You can find all the results for all the races on the Secretary of State's website. I'm Drew Jarrow, and I'm going to be joined today by Bobby Lucier. So we have some big headlines from last night, and what do you have to share with us?
Yes, thanks, Drew. Lovely to be here with you.
Thank you.
It was not a huge night at the top of the ticket last night for the primary election here. We had a couple of interesting races for the lieutenant governor's race, both in the Republican and Democratic primary. We also had a storyline, I'd say, about donations flowing in from the right, supporting moderate Democrats, challenging incumbents that are more left-leaning or progressive. And I'd say for the most part, those incumbents were successful in fending off those challenges.
Yeah, I think we're going to have some discussion on that a little later in the show. And so Bernie Sanders?
Bernie
Sanders was voting out today.
We did also have Bernie at the top of the ticket.
Yep.
He wasn't facing anyone in the primary, but he did win the nomination for another 6-year term in the Senate, and he voted in the New North End yesterday, and we've got some footage from that. Let's throw to see what Bernie had to say after he voted.
Tonight, Elon Musk had former President Trump on X. Yep. You many years have railed against corporate media. Should she get equal time?
Well, I think she should. But I think what has concerned me most about Donald Trump in the last week is the outrageous degree to which he is lying. Look, in politics, we can have different points of view. But when he goes around the country saying that the thousands of people who are coming out to Vice President Harris's rallies don't exist, that they're all fake, that is really quite insane. And I would hope that Vermonters and people all over this country, regardless of your political view, we could disagree on the issues, but you cannot have somebody as the most important, holding the most important position in America, who is just an outrageous liar. You know, that's the message that I've gotten from the last week.
So should social media be regulated?
Well, that's a long discussion for a 12-second ad, but I think there is a lot of concern about the massive amounts of disinformation that gets on to social media. And Trump is using that to a very dangerous degree.
Senator, with your seat and potentially facing off against Gerald Malloy come November, can you talk a bit about holding on to that majority alongside the Democrats?
Yeah, right. Look, this is going to be a very tough election nationally. I think the presidential election is going to be very close, so I'm going to do everything I can to make sure that Kamala Harris and Tim Walz win. I think Democrats have a reasonable chance of recapturing the House. The Senate is going to be very, very close, and I'll do what I can to make sure that we have a Democratic Senate. The truth of the matter is I think most people know we cannot bring forth an agenda that meets the needs of working people unless you have support in the House and the Senate. So I hope we can win the White House and the House and the Senate as well. Do you have any? Okay.
Senator, why should Vermonters re-elect you for another 6 years?
Well, I hope that people perceive that I've been doing a good job. I have been leading the effort in this country to try to lower the cost of prescription drugs, to build affordable housing, to deal with the climate crisis and protect the needs of working families. And as chairman of the Health Education Labor Committee, I'm in a position to do some important things.
Looking at your likely opponent, Gerald Malloy, what is your impression on him, and what do you expect the main points of the campaign to be?
Well, I don't know Mr. Malloy terribly well. I've known him once, and I just look forward to an issue-oriented campaign. I suspect we have very fundamental differences of opinion on the issues. I believe that it is women who have the right to control their own bodies and not the government. And I think the Supreme Court decision on Roe v. Wade was terrible. I think the Supreme Court decision, by the way, on Citizens United, which allows billionaires to buy elections, was a disaster as well. I think we've got to raise the minimum wage to a living wage. I happen to believe that the United States has got to do what every other major country on earth does and guarantee health care to all people as a human right. So I suspect views on those issues are probably different.
Are you concerned about the Middle East, what's happening in the Middle East?
That's about it. Thanks a lot, guys.
So how's Bernie Sanders voting, giving a little speech about Citizens United and donations, which we plan to talk about a little bit later. And before we really drill down into the results for each race, I think we should talk a little bit about the balance of power in the Senate and the House right now, and the Democrats' veto-proof majority that they have.
Yes, exactly. So Vermonters have this funny way of sending an extremely divided government to Montpelier. So we have incumbent Phil Scott, who's one of the most popular governors in the country, as well as a very strong veto-proof majority for the Democrats and progressives on the left in both chambers. So right now in the House, I think there are 100 votes needed to override the governor's veto, which he does use often. He used a record number of times this past biennium. And I think the House had 107 seats of Democrats in this past session. So a little bit of breathing room there, 107 seats, 100 needed for the veto. And then there's also the progressives, who often vote alongside the Democrats on those veto overrides. And then in the Senate, it's a little bit more slim. We've got 21 Democrats and 1 progressive. So here you'll see in the Senate, we've got 21 Democrats and 1 progressive voting in the Senate. And this is the one that is, I think, going to be a little bit tougher for the Democrats to defend in November, with 20 votes needed to override, and 6 of those Democratic seats are vacated this election cycle. So new folks coming in to run for those seats, some of them coming from the House, and of course Republicans who have not vacated any seats on their side are going to be looking to steal a couple of those seats away and take away the veto override power that the legislature used many times this session on Governor Phil Scott.
Yeah, I think it's going to be tight in the Senate on the veto-proof majority.
It is. It probably is, and we'll see there are a couple of races, not necessarily in Chittenden County where we'll see Republicans do well, but there are a couple of races in the Northeast Kingdom and in other parts of the state where we could see a Republican steal one of those seats.
Yeah, so I think we'll probably start at the top of the ticket with the Democratic primary for governor.
Yes.
So that was a pretty interesting race.
Yeah, let's talk about that. So at the top of the ticket, there was some talk of some higher profile names: Murrow Weinberger, the former mayor of Burlington; Howard Dean, former governor, potentially making another run to unseat Phil Scott. Neither of them decided to actually jump in the race, and so we have a candidate, Esther Charleston, who has won the primary against Peter Duval. And Esther is an educator from Middlebury, one of the co-chairs of the Vermont Commission on Women, but hasn't held a highly elected public office in Vermont before, and faces a pretty big challenge against Governor Phil Scott.
Yeah, I mean, Phil Scott enjoys probably the highest approval rating of any governor in the country, exactly. And so that's when Esther does face him, and she won pretty handily. But when she does face him in November, it'll be tough. It'll be tough. It'll be
a tough race. She'll certainly be at a fundraising disadvantage, which is uncommon for Democrats, but without a high-profile name like Murrow Weinberger or Howard Dean, Esther Charleston will be facing a big challenge there. And we did host a forum with Peter Duval and Esther Charleston about a month or so ago to hear their views and to hear particularly about their opinions on Governor Phil Scott and how they're planning to peel off votes from the incumbent governor.
Yeah, so I think we'll show that clip now then about.
Well, all candidates would lose against Phil Scott, even Howard Dean. Teflon Phil and the Democrats are happy with the legislative administrative duopoly. My approach is to offer an environmental perspective and significant policy proposals on the order of billions of dollars per year in economic cost reductions. Closing the wood chip plants and shrinking the automobile fleet would be lead initiatives. And only with cost savings and that decoupling from the 1900s can Vermont move forward into the 21st century, already a quarter of the way finished. So I would lead with policy and new perspective.
Thank you very much. Esther Charleston, your thoughts on Governor Phil Scott?
Yeah, so Governor Phil Scott's handling of COVID-19 pandemic was generally well received. However, we're in a critical time to understand that this election presents an opportunity to address the areas where we can do better. While recognizing his contributions, it is also essential to emphasize that inaction on pressing issues is a luxury Vermont cannot afford. So needing a leader who is proactive, a leader who will see the people. And so my vision and approach is different. I would be a collaborative leader when it comes to problem solving, focused on inclusivity and progress, and engagement and transparency. It's important that government is transparent.
So Phil Scott went unchallenged. So I think we'll move down to the ticket to lieutenant governor, because the Democratic lieutenant governor race was very watched, I think.
It was a highly watched race, and a lot of money came in on both sides for the Democratic nomination for lieutenant governor. We saw incumbent David Zuckerman facing off against Thomas Renner, who sits on the Winooski City Council as deputy mayor. And this race was Zuckerman, an old school progressive who has been in this seat for a few terms, has some statewide roots in terms of his campaign, having been successful a few times now. And Thomas Renner, a newcomer on the statewide scene, and this is one of those races where Thomas Renner, a Democrat through and through as self-described, was attracting donations from the Tarrant family and other big Republican donors who normally are playing more on the right side of the political spectrum, came into this race to support Thomas Renner and try to unseat David Zuckerman, and they were unsuccessful, those donations, as Zuckerman, the incumbent, did prevail here.
Yeah, and it wasn't too close of a race either. And I think with both candidates too. Oh, we have the numbers up here, and it was Zuckerman clearly was the winner in the race.
Yeah.
And speaking of donations, we actually have a clip of the two candidates speaking about donations, which we can go ahead and throw to. I think it's going to be really interesting to see what they say based on what ended up happening.
Yeah.
Lieutenant Governor, Democrat, Thomas Renner, and David Zuckerman.
The unfortunate thing about campaigns is you have to raise money to make it work. I wish that wasn't the case. It's also very easy to raise money when you've been a politician for a very long time, or if you come from money or have connections to money. I'm not one of those people. I don't have connections to money, nor do I have any money. So the donations that I receive, I'm very thankful for. I'm thankful for anybody who wishes to support my campaign. And I haven't been going over every single donation that comes in. What I will say is, if somebody believes in a candidate and they donate to them, I think that they're doing so because they believe in that candidate. People have different opinions on every single issue. What I know is, I believe in democratic policies. I've been a Democrat my entire life. I'm involved in the Democratic Party, both at the statewide, county level, and the town level. I'm a Democrat through and through, and I believe in protecting a woman's right to choose, affordable health care, housing, uplifting minority voices. Yeah, that's what I've got to say. Thank you.
Great, thanks so much, Thomas. David, your thoughts on this question?
Yeah, I've never solicited money nor gotten any that I know of in any kind of significant amount from people who are sort of diametrically opposed to the values that I have. I think in this cycle what we're seeing is some of those Republicans are giving in certain races where they really want to defeat the people that are not quite where they are. And in whether this race or some other races, the folks who are donating that money, they're folks that have been highly opposed to Bernie. They're highly opposed to me. They don't want someone who's outspoken about the fact that our society for the last 40 years has moved the economic system to concentrate wealth at the top. And basically, that's why we're hitting the housing challenges we have. That's why we're hitting the education funding challenges that we have. That's why we're hitting the climate issues that we have, and solutions sometimes come up with affecting working class people. People like me have been very outspoken about the fact that our society has concentrated wealth in the hands of a few, and it's time for those folks to pitch in so that we can address these societal challenges. They don't want me in this office. That's okay. I hope folks will counter that money with their vote and give it to me.
So moving to the right side of the lieutenant governor race, we had two people on the Republican ticket. And so we had John Rogers and Gregory Thayer. And something I found particularly interesting about this race is the juxtaposition between what you normally think of as a very Vermont-style Republican in John Rogers and a very I would say, more nationally identified Republican on in Gregory. And I think that really showed in the vote numbers, because John Rogers was the clear winner in that race.
Right, and so John Rogers was a state senator and a representative a few years ago, and so is coming back onto the political scene. He does have a little bit more name recognition. And you're right, he is a little bit more of a, maybe a Phil Scott Republican. He was actually, he was a Democrat when he was in the legislature, and has now moved over to the Republican side, sort of a different tack from some of these more moderate Democrats that have tried to challenge on the Democratic side in the primary, in the lieutenant governor's race, in the state Senate race that we'll talk about shortly. John Rogers decided, in his words, the Democrats have come too far to the left. He's now going to try and challenge from the right. And he was successful in securing the nomination for the Republican ticket in November. So now it'll be John Rogers, the, let's say, moderate Republican former Democrat, facing off against the very progressive, old school progressive David Zuckerman in November. So John Rogers, the victor there.
Yeah, and he also had the endorsement of Phil Scott too. So John Rogers was going in pretty strong, name recognition and the endorsement of Phil Scott, who again, Vermonters have handed him the election every time pretty heavily. So.
And that is an interesting, you'll see, John Rogers did win this race pretty handily as well. And, just based on the vote counts that we see in November and past years, there are many folks who are going to the polls, they're voting for Democrats in the legislature, and they're voting for the Republican nominee, Phil Scott, for governor. So that split ticket is going to be really interesting to see if that continues, both for the governor's race and also for the lieutenant governor's race.
Yeah, absolutely. And the split ticket thing, I think, is something we're seeing a lot nationwide, also, but very specifically in Vermont, because people who are voting not just down ballot Democrat, but down ballot progressive are like, they want to balance, what they feel balance out the House and the state House with the two split tickets. So, I mentioned the juxtaposition between two Republicans, and while they definitely did agree on a lot, we have a clip here of them very much difference of opinion, let's say, on when we asked one of our climate questions during the forum, which I did a few weeks back. So I think we'll go to that clip of them speaking about climate change. Okay. And so this next question is going to be about climate change. Vermont's greenhouse gas emissions per capita are among the highest in the Northeast, driven largely by heating and transportation. What is your plan to reduce Vermont's greenhouse gas emissions in those sectors? So Gregory, you'll get to go first on this one.
Yeah, I don't see a big issue with it, with our footprint. I know John, he put a bill together, S201 back in 2020 to curb or stop people with the greenhouse gas, which to me led to part of the Global Warming Solutions Act and everything. And to me that's an issue because we have to get places, and wind and solar is never going to be enough energy to power our great state or our great nation. And I think we do a lot of great things in terms of the environment, of climate and everything, and we're all doing our own thing. I'm driving around right now with my windows open, with no air conditioning, and I'm sweating a little, but it's okay. It's beautiful out. And I just think that people need to take care of, do what they've got to do and take care of themselves. And I think I don't see a big problem with it. I know it's out there, and I know we hear about it and they talk about it, but I'm not a big climate guy in terms of that, if you will.
Yeah.
So thank you.
Yeah. So John, I'll let you have the 30 seconds to rebut because your name was
yes,
mentioned. Yes,
absolutely.
And the 60 to do the 90 to do the question.
Excellent. Thank you. And I think Greg has some of his facts wrong. I'm not sure what bill he is referring to, but I did not support the so-called Global Solutions Act, and I actually was a staunch opponent of it. So I really disagree with much of what the legislature has done. I call it faux climate change policy because much of that policy that they've passed in the last 20 years has been regressive. It has hurt poor and working class people, and the money has been concentrated to the super wealthy who are doing the development. So that would be my rebuttal.
He mentioned my name though, can I?
I like to lead by example, and I have nearly 500 acres of farm and forest, and we work 7 days a week to keep it. It's about a $50,000 a year payment on the farm, and last year we paid $22,000 in property tax, and that's going to go up 16% this year. My land provides ecosystem services for thousands of Vermonters, yet I get nothing for it, no recognition that I'm doing the right thing by the planet. And we leave large sections of grassland that provide habitat for grassland birds. Many of them are threatened or endangered.
So, state senate race. We'll start with the state senate race, and this is for Chittenden 3rd District.
This is the central district.
Central
so this
district,
was the
thank
big
you.
one, Drew.
Yeah.
This was the one that I think most of the eyes, even across the state, we're looking at here. Stuart Ledbetter was an anchor for NBC, I believe, for many, many years, and is a well-known face in many of Vermont living room, and retired last year from that job at NBC and decided to run for state senate in one of the most left-leaning Senate districts in the state. This is the Chittenden Central District, so it's most of Burlington, all of Winooski, and then a chunk of Colchester, Essex Junction, and Essex. And we saw in this race, it was a close one. There was a lot of money that came to the race, a lot of talk about this race, and the three incumbents, Tanya Vihovsky, Martine Larock-Ulick, and Phil Baruth, pulled it out and won this race against the challenger Stuart Ledbetter.
Yeah, and this is one thing we were talking about donations, because Stuart Ledbetter actually raised quite a bit of money, all things considered. It's the state of Vermont, and something I think is really interesting. So here we have the numbers up here, and it was close, but Stuart Ledbetter did not pull it out. And I say what you will about Citizens United and money influencing elections. Vermont's definitely a holdout in that really people liking you, name recognition is important in the state, and you have a better chance of election or being reelected or continuing your term, based on your principles, based on your policy, which is, it's great to see in the state of Vermont.
It's true. And incumbency is also a big advantage in Vermont. People like to vote for the folks that they know, and that's why this race was one of the outliers, in that we knew that Stuart Ledbetter did have name recognition, was a well-known commodity in Vermont politics. The thing that people didn't know, because he was a journalist, was what's his politics, what are his policy positions. There wasn't honestly a ton of daylight, at least in the forums that these candidates attended together, between the policy positions of the four of them. But you could see then, a Vermont Digger article came out that actually showed a bit of difference in these candidates around public safety and the approach to the safety issues that we're seeing downtown, as well as the drug crisis and the homelessness epidemic that we're seeing downtown.
Yeah, and speaking of our forums, we have a clip from our forum on public safety of the four Chittenden Central candidates talking about their belief in what to do about public safety, and so I think we'll actually cut to that now, because I think that'll be very interesting.
Downtown is shaky right now. I don't think there's any question. I've lived in the Burlington area for 40 years, seen it ebb and flow. Right now, I can understand where the caller's coming from. I've heard that as well when I have gone door to door. I still do go downtown. I still feel safe, but I'm a guy. I'm not saying that everybody else should or admonish anyone who doesn't. We have lost a lot of police officers downtown, and that may contribute to this. It's a tourist town. But regardless, it is too important to let language. Downtown Burlington is a hugely important economic driver for northern Vermont. It's a hugely important tourist magnet for Vermont. So whatever the cause, we have to fix this. The question about criminal justice.
Priorities to advance criminal justice reform.
Well, we have a huge backlog in the courts that mushroomed during the pandemic. I know the legislature has tried to give the judiciary a little bit more. I've talked with public defenders just in the last couple of days who say they can't even get people to apply for some of these job vacancies that might, when filled, help with respect to prosecutors, PDs, even judicial staff, court reporters. But we need to hold offenders accountable. I don't think that there's any question about that. I've heard people talk, and I understand it, the revolving door at the courthouse, where people don't feel that there's much of a deterrent anymore, maybe because the courts are so backlogged. I think until we can fix that, a lot of people in this community aren't going to feel terribly safe, and I think we have to fix it.
Great, thank you. Philip Ruth.
So I do go downtown all the time, and I will say that two things can be true at once. It is true that there are problems in the downtown area. Retail theft is a real problem. Violence is a real problem. Drug addiction is a real problem. It is also true that some people in the outlying towns have gotten a kind of exaggerated picture of that. And I've had conversations with people where they believe there are, gangland slayings every day on Church Street. Not true. But what I would say is this: in the Judiciary Committee this past year, we did look at retail theft penalties, and we increased them for retail theft under $900. That was done with a great deal of thought because we don't want to, unduly increase the number of people we incarcerate or detain. But on the other hand, there was evidence that a small number of people were driving very large retail theft in the Burlington area. So I heard that loud and clear from the merchants on Church Street, and we tried to do that. The other thing is even more difficult. We did override the governor's veto on an overdose prevention site. I believe that will reduce needles that are scattered sometimes in areas where the public goes. It will reduce public drug consumption, and it will allow us to connect with those people and get them the wraparound services that they need. So those are two things I think we did specifically for places like downtown Burlington.
Great, thanks so much. Tanya?
Thank you. So first of all, yes, I was downtown last night, and I lived to tell the tale today. I do want to be clear, though, that the Burlington City Council did not defund the police. They used already vacant positions to decrease spending and increase mental health supports. So that is a narrative that I think has been spun that is problematic. And statistically, Burlington is still the second safest city in the country. And yes, there are problems. Statistically, it is still safer than it was 30 years ago. And we have a rising rate of homelessness, a rising rate of substance use disorder. And so for me, when I think about the best ways to respond to these things, it is investing in making sure that everyone's housed so that they don't have to have the worst day of their life in the middle of a public street. It's investing to make sure that people have immediate access to substance use care, to education, and to restorative justice. I think one of the key things, and we did pass a really critically important restorative justice bill, but I think we already know what works, but we have to make real investments in them and wait for those things to work. We have 50 years of experience that increasing penalties and putting more people in jail doesn't make people safer. We have the 5th highest incarceration rate in the world in the United States, and we are not the 5th safest country in the world. In fact, we're in the bottom 3rd. So what we know is incarcerating people doesn't make people safer. What makes people safer is making sure everyone has their basic needs met. And I think if we invest in restorative justice to heal the harms that are being done now, we can build towards a system where we can make sure everyone have their needs met and people feel safe in their community. And that we're following the data. 2 years or a year ago, we passed a data bill that's really meant to look at all of this data. Who is being incarcerated? Why are they being incarcerated? Who's being arrested? Why? And I think in all of it, we have to address racial disparity because that is a very real aspect of our criminal justice system.
Thank you so much. And Martine.
So it's hard to talk about safety, I find, generally in this country, just because of the amount of guns that are prevalent everywhere. It's a dangerous place, and we know what can happen at a grocery store, at a school. There is a certain amount of danger that is inherent in a society that is very tolerant of so many guns, and also a society that doesn't invest enough in mental health supports. So it's a tricky question in that it's a bigger question. Do I feel safe in Burlington? Yes. I love my city, and I go there multiple times a week. As someone who has been on the school board for 8 years, I've had to navigate the shutting down of our high school and then the move of our kids downtown into a Macy's building. And first and foremost in all of our minds was the safety of our children downtown. So that is something that has been very important to us as a school board and frankly as a community. So I think we absolutely need reform around safety and around incarceration, as my colleague said. I was not a defund the police supporter, but I certainly did and do support major reform in policing in this country. Absolutely. It has to be done. So yeah, I would just say we all have a certain amount of, I think we all need to show our support of downtown, show our love for the city, and go there when we can. And that certainly will help.
Great, thanks.
So that was a clip of the Chittenden Central District where all three incumbents won, talking about public safety. And so we'll move on to the Southeastern District of Chittenden, where, again, all three incumbents also won, and this was a pretty interesting race. You want to talk a little bit about it?
Right, so less high-profile race, but Dr. Lewis Myers, who is a doctor, lives in Shelburne. He's a hospitalist, works down in Rutland, came into this race to talk about healthcare, really. I mean, that was the issue that he wanted to make this race about at a time when, you know, the issues that folks were really paying attention to primarily were affordability and public safety, public property taxes were big ones. Healthcare has kind of fallen off the radar in a lot of campaigns. He came in and made sure that this race had a lot of discourse about healthcare. He was up against not just three incumbents, but three very powerful incumbents. Keisharam Hinsdale and Thomas Chittenden serve on the Finance Committee, and Ginny Lyons, who's been in the Senate for a long time, is the chair of the Health and Welfare Committee in the Senate. And so this was a difficult race for Lewis Myers. He didn't win. He didn't raise very much money either. It was a tough race to challenge these three incumbent senators. But he did bring up some conversations about how the state funds healthcare in the forum particularly that we hosted here.
Yeah, and I think it's really important when we're a society that's talking about harm reduction and an overdose crisis. Bringing up healthcare is really important. And like you said, during our forums, we had Dr. Myers definitely spoke a lot about healthcare, which we have a clip of that we can go to now on.
Well, thank you. Again, I'm the only non-incumbent here. I recognize that it's not easy to run against incumbents, and especially here in Vermont. People get to know them in their communities. But sometimes if we want new policies, we need to change the people making them. And we need new voices, we need new ideas. What I would bring to the state Senate is 30 years of frontline experience in medicine. And we have a healthcare system that's really struggling. And some of that is from mistakes that have been made, failed policies in this state. The One Care program is now ending. It was an expensive failure, which Governor Shumlin gifted us as he was leaving office 8 years ago. We're now on the verge of going into another experimental federal program called the AHEAD program. That will commit us to 11 years with the feds, and it's very similar to the One Care program. I know that Senator Lyons supports it. I respectfully disagree. The Green Mountain Care Board is finally putting the brakes on some of the health care increases in Vermont by keeping the rates down. I think that they need to continue. Again, Senator Lyons would like to take that power away from them and put it in the governor's office. I respectfully disagree. So we have some areas of disagreement. What I can bring to the state Senate is hard experiences learned and knowledge of how healthcare really works, to talk with legislators. It is complicated, and I think the more they can hear from someone who's been involved in healthcare, the more we can make good decisions.
Great, and since Senator Lyons, you were mentioned, if you want 30 seconds to rebut.
Thank you. Yeah, I would. It's very interesting to hear something that I believe in or support, and I will simply say that sometimes those things are not true, and in this case, that's the case.
Just to clarify, you're saying that you do support.
In terms of supporting the AHEAD model, what I do support is allowing for an exploration of how the state might participate and what the conditions are for that participation. I do not support something categorically, and I'll wait to see the data. On the other one, about putting the control in the governor's office, never heard that one before. And I'm ashamed to hear it from someone who's sitting next to me.
So that was Dr. Lewis Myers and Ginny Thomas talking about healthcare. Ginny Lyons talking about healthcare, thank you, in the forum that we did. So let's move on to the Chittenden 17 results. This was actually Emma Mulvaney Stanek's, now mayor's seat.
Yes, so Emma Mulvaney Stanek served in this Chittenden 17 district for a number of terms. This is a district in Burlington that includes some of the old North End and some of the new North End. And when Mulvaney Stanek was elected mayor, she vacated that seat, and then the governor, Phil Scott, appointed Abby Duke, who is a local business owner of Sugar Snap Catering, to this seat. And progressives were upset about this. They said there was a progressive in the seat before, there should be a progressive in the seat again. Governor Scott didn't listen to them, appointed Abby Duke. And so then we saw this primary between the technically incumbent, but had not yet won an election yet, Abby Duke, and Missa Aloisi, who is more on the progressive side of Burlington politics, coming in for the Democratic nomination. And Abby Duke did pull out this victory. I was a little surprised to see this was, Missa Aloisi was running a campaign with much of the same infrastructure that Emma Mulvaney Stanek's campaign used to win and beat Joan Shannon in March, but the turnout here was really low. Only 446 votes for Abby Duke and 299 votes for Missa Aloisi in this district. And we'll see Abby Duke return to the State House in January.
You know, it's really surprising to see that in this entire race there's less than 1,000 votes counted, because while yes, primaries don't typically have the biggest turnout, we definitely had a higher turnout in this primary for the state than we have had in the past before. So that was pretty surprising to see less than 1,000 votes total cast.
It's true. It was especially with such a high turnout in March for the mayor's election. This is a very different story here, and you can't really characterize whether this election as a whole in Chittenden County was a win for the progressives or the Democrats. On the one hand, Tanya Vihovsky, a progressive Democrat, beating a more moderate Democrat, Stuart Ledbetter, that's a big win for the progressives. But in this race, Missa Aloisi, the more progressive, losing to moderate Democrat Abby Duke, that's a win for the Democrats. So a little bit of give and take there. And we did hear, especially in Burlington, we all know that emergency shelter is a big deal, and these candidates did have slightly different views on that issue.
Yeah, so when we hosted our forum for these two candidates, we did have a segment about emergency shelters, which we have a clip of that we can go to now.
So when we think about long-term solutions for homelessness, it's about housing, right? So the data seems pretty clear that communities with very expensive housing have much more homelessness. So we need housing. We need to look at housing for the long-term solution and medium-term solution. In the short run, we have a humanitarian crisis. I mean, we have thousands of people living on the streets, and it in particular in places like Burlington, Rutland, community hubs, more urban type environments where people are gathering, and the state needs to step up and help house these people in exactly how to pay for it, I don't know. But we need to look at all these funding, all these interesting funding ways, and maybe it's a short-term infusion of cash to handle the short-term housing needs and really emergency housing needs while building the housing. But the state needs, it should not be the city. The city is expected to solve the problem. The state needs to play a much bigger role.
Thank you, Abby. Missa, your thoughts on emergency shelter?
Yeah, it's a topic dear and near to my heart. I've had a relative homeless before, and ex's child homeless before, and so bringing the dignity back to people who are struggling is really important, and the criteria for which you have to hit to get into emergency shelter the bar keeps getting lower and lower and lower. So the people who really can get into emergency shelters are the elderly and the sick. We also need to create a variety of shelter options. I think the biggest problem with certain shelters is people who are struggling with mental health. It's not a good environment for them, and they often would prefer to be on the street versus in a shelter. So it's in the design of the shelters themselves. I think there are some solutions to maintain people to want to be in a shelter and then to move on to transitional housing and then into something else. But then also to pay for it. I mean, I brought it up before, but the fair share is a way to increase revenue in the state. And I think it is a viable way to increase revenue in the state. But we need to, again, raise the bar and then look at a variety of sheltering options, not just a single solution.
So that was a clip from Abby Duke and Missa Aloisi on their public safety beliefs for the city. So if we move on to the next race, which was the Chittenden 13, there was 2 seats up. 1 seat not competitive. The second seat was actually very competitive. And while it has not been confirmed yet, it appears Bram Klepner is going to be declared winner for that second seat. So this was actually a very tight race.
Yes, so we do have the green check in a sort of a watermark there because we haven't heard the call on this race yet. It's a very close vote count between CEO of Danforth Pewter, Bram Klepner, and attorney Dale Azaria, who works for the Conservation Law Foundation. And we see Larry Luak, who is a longtime local progressive, also coming in there with a number of meaningful votes, especially in a race when the difference between who gets this second seat and who doesn't is less than 30 votes. So it was a very close race here. This used to be Gabrielle Stebbins' seat. Gabrielle Stebbins was a House rep who served on the Environment and Energy Committee, Natural Resources, I forget what it's called, but she was a big player in a lot of the climate policy conversations for the past biennium. And so with her stepping down, there's a role to fill there, certainly around climate work. And these were 3 pretty similar in a lot of ways candidates vying for this second seat. Tiff Bloomley, of course, the incumbent, won the first seat handily. And it looks like if you do want to split it, if you do want to kind of at least split by the identities and the occupations of these folks, the more business end of the Democratic Party won out with Bram Klepner, if in fact he did take this seat, as opposed to Dale Azaria and Larry Luak more on the nonprofit side of things.
Which is interesting because the state was able to pass our big climate bill. You know, so you'd think climate would have been a big influence in that race.
And they do have a lot. I mean, Bram Klepner did speak quite extensively about climate. All 3 candidates were very well versed in climate policy, and so it was a very competitive race. I don't know if any of these 3 candidates will be voting differently in the votes to come in this biennium, but it could be an influence on some of the in the weeds climate policy that we might see here, if in fact the winner of this seat does take Gabrielle Stebbins' place on the Natural Resources Committee.
Yeah, and so you were talking about all 3 candidates having somewhat similar overlaps in their beliefs in voting, and we actually have from our forum a lightning round on this, all the candidates speaking, which we can actually cut to now on that.
Should private schools be funded by public dollars? Larry? No?
In certain cases.
Okay, yes or no?
It's not a yes or no answer.
No. No?
No.
No, wonderful. Do you support raising the age of family court jurisdiction? Tiffany?
Yes. I mean, the delay is really unfortunate.
Wonderful.
Yes.
Yes?
Yes.
Yes?
No.
No, wonderful. Should biomass burning wood play a role in emission reduction strategies? Dale?
No, it's dirtier than gas.
Okay.
Yes, biomass emits an enormous amount of carbon dioxide, and it must be part of the strategy. Phasing it out must be part of the strategy.
Yes, wonderful. Tiff?
Yes.
Yes.
No, long term, but the McNeil plant plays a key role in the transition to net zero. So.
Did Governor Scott overstep his authority by appointing Zoe Sanders as interim education secretary? Bram?
No, but he certainly overstepped good judgment.
Okay, wonderful. Dale?
Yes, he overstepped.
Yes. Tiff?
Yes, he overstepped.
And Larry?
Yes, and I support the legal challenge to that action by the 2 state senators.
Okay, where do you get the news, Mr. Larry?
I have online subscriptions to VT Digger, the Boston Globe, and the Washington Post, and read them every day.
Wow. Dale?
VT Digger, 7 days in the New York Times.
Okay. Bro?
Exactly what Dale said. VT Digger, 7 days, in the New York Times.
Okay, Tiff?
I would also add MSNBC because I do like Rachel Maddow, and I subscribe to a lot of blogs.
Okay. And Tiff, do you ride the bus?
I don't ride the bus because I walk or ride my bike in Burlington.
Okay. Larry?
I don't to work because there's no bus service to Charlotte. I wish I could. But.
Okay. Yes?
I commuted by bus to Montpelier for 5 years until the pandemic had me switch to remote work. Now I commute to Montpelier 1 day a week.
Okay. Larry?
And I did commute to Middlebury from time to time on the bus and occasionally by bike and the rest of the time by car.
And Sam Lyon, what's your favorite ice cream in Vermont?
That's such an unfair question. Maple creamies, Ben & Jerry's, non-dairy, oatmeal dream pie, the Sisters of Anarchy, it's all good.
Yes.
Ben & Jerry's strawberry cheesecake.
Mm-hmm. Daddy?
My favorite Ben & Jerry's flavor is pistachio, and I assure everyone that this has nothing to do with the fact that Jerry Greenfield has endorsed my campaign.
Shy guy.
Shy guy. Okay. Now, do you support overdose prevention centers? And let's start with Larry.
I do. I'm very grateful that the legislature found the votes to override the governor's veto of the overdose prevention center or in the supervised program in Burlington. And I would like to see if that experiment that pilot site is found to be successful, I'd like to see it replicated across the state.
Tip?
I do, and I advocated for it very strongly.
Okay.
I do.
Wonderful.
I do as well.
Wonderful. Perfect.
So that was the clip from the Chittenden 13 district and all the candidates doing the lightning round, which I actually really like the lightning round because it feels like a great way for people to not overthink and to grab a really good, honest answer out of candidates.
I'm glad we did that as well. I think it was, and you do see a little bit of difference in some of the candidates' positions on some things. I mean, there are a few things where Burlington Democrats do differ. I was surprised to see Larry Lewack say that he did not support raise the age. There's always a little bit of difference on the public school question being funded by, or private schools being funded by public dollars, and then also seeing where candidates stand on biomass. I mean, there is a movement on, particularly in hardcore environmental activists that believe the McNeil plant should not be operating, and it was interesting to see where candidates fall on that.
Yeah, absolutely, and it's great to also understand. We talk a lot about is modern politics about vibes or is it about policy? Mm-hmm. And I feel like that lightning round is a very great merge of the two of both. You have vibes questions like the ice cream, mm-hmm. and then you have policy questions that they really need to answer very consistently and clearly because they only have a few seconds to answer, which I think is a really great merge of the two. We run a vibes campaign and we run an actual policy campaign.
I agree with you.
So, thank you. so we'll move on to the next race, which is the Chittenden 7th District.
Yes.
And I think we saw some surprising results from this.
Yeah, so this is the Shelburne seat that was, I think Jessica Broomstead was in this seat and she had stepped down. So this was an open seat in Shelburne, Chittenden 7 in the House. And we saw I think the favorite Michael Ashew, who is the current chair of the Shelburne Select Board, running in this race against a local business owner, Sean Sweeney. And the results here, which I did not expect, Sean Sweeney pulled out, well, it actually hasn't been called yet, because it is a very close race. It's a very close race here in terms of the numbers. Just a few, dozen or so, what is it? Yeah, about 40 or so votes between these two candidates. It was a very close race. And but it looks as though Sean Sweeney has pulled out this victory here. Didn't see a ton of difference in policy between these two, but Michael Ashew, a professor of philosophy in UVM, and Sean Sweeney, a business owner, so certainly a very different experience and skill set for these two candidates.
Yeah, and we talk a little bit about name recognition, and I think it's, your name recognition is important, but it also needs to be important with the voting base that you have. And I think that local business owner makes sense to a community because they hear it, they see it all the time. And it's really interesting to see how, to speculate on the impacts of these different things.
Yeah, well, I will say too, I mean, maybe this wasn't a huge election for moderate Democrats or progressives per se. It was a big election for business owners. Sean Sweeney from Shelburne potentially pulling out this win, Abby Duke, the owner of Sugar Snap Catering, pulling out a win, and then Bram Klepner, who is the CEO of Danforth Pewter, also potentially winning in Chittenden 13. So more business representation on the Democratic side in Montpelier. Potentially, these are primaries. They'll have to face Republicans. It's Chittenden County. They'll probably win.
Sure, and that really does make a lot of sense when you think about a lot of these races have been framed around public safety in relation to low-level crimes in the community, and whatever people's opinions are or thoughts on that are, that is something that the United States is very much a single voter, or a single idea voter. They come to the primaries, they come to elections with a very important one thing on their mind, and they vote towards that. So that does make a lot of sense as to why you're right. We have seen a lot of big wins for business winners or business owners.
And you mentioned you like that lightning round, Drew.
Yes.
We've got another lightning round between these two candidates to try and see what the differences are between these two here.
Yeah, so we can cut to that now.
So should private schools, and we're going to start with you on this one, should private schools be funded with public dollars?
No, absolutely not. I think it undermines public education, and it's a violation of the social contract.
Great, thank you.
No.
Okay, great.
Simple.
All right. Do you support raising the age of family court jurisdiction, and if so, to what age, or if not, just yes or no?
Are you talking about raising the age so the kids don't have to go into the judicial system?
Correct.
Then yes, and it should go to 20, I'm not sure what it is right now, but it should go to 18 or 21.
Okay, great.
The initiative is to move it went to 18 last year, they want to move it to 19. I'm fine with that. The government made a big to-do about it, claiming, this is 10 seconds, claiming there was evidence it wasn't effective. As far as we know, it's been effective. I think we should go to 19.
Should biomass play a role in emissions reduction strategies?
Does that mean me?
Yeah.
I love burning wood. I have a wood burning stove. I heat my house. The answer is no. It's not a good long-term solution. Better designed homes, better ways to attain efficiency would be better use of our funding.
And I think this also may be talking about things like the McNeil plant and larger.
Right, yeah.
So over time, I think those bigger facilities, yes, I think we have to consider that being part of the carbon footprint that we have to lessen.
Do you support, I think you both supported overdose prevention centers in your comments.
Yes.
Did Governor Scott overstep his authority? So this is the balance of power by appointing Zoe Saunders as interim education secretary against the will of the legislature.
I understand they're going into a lawsuit with that. I have faith in the judiciary. I will stand behind what they figure out.
I think it was overstepping his boundary. Even if it wasn't, it was an insult and a provocative statement. I don't know why he did that at a time when we needed an education secretary.
And in 10 seconds, where do you get your news? What are your favorite sources?
Washington Post, New York Times, Burlington Free Press sometimes when it's like sports, Shelburne News, NPR, VPR.
Almost all the same ones, but I also religiously have read the Burlington Free Press since I was a young guy, and I love 7 Days and what they do and what they represent here in this community, and Shelburne News. But New York Times every Sunday.
7 Days, gotta add that. Yeah, 7 Days is a good one.
So that was the lightning round clip from the Chittenden 7 district between Sean Sweeney and Michael Eshoo, with it looking like Sean Sweeney's going to take that seat. So it's good to hear from the candidates on that lightning round, like I've been saying. So next up is the Chittenden 21, which is the seat that Taylor Small did not seek re-election for.
Exactly. So this is the Winooski district. There are 2 seats here. Daisy Berbeco and Taylor Small had these 2 seats in the past biennium, and saw that Taylor Small did not run for re-election. Daisy Berbeco did. So an open seat here, and Chloe Tomlinson has secured the 2nd seat here, it looks like. Chloe Tomlinson worked on Bernie Sanders' campaign for president in 2020. She now works at Front Porch Forum, will probably be one of the youngest members of the Vermont House of Representatives this session. There was a challenge on the ballot, Nick Brownell, but Nick Brownell did not come in for a forum and did not run much of a campaign besides getting on the ballot. So essentially we knew where this race was going to go, and it's Chloe Tomlinson and Daisy Berbeco winning the Winooski House seats.
Yeah, it was also a race where there was a lot of blank ballots on that there too. I believe I saw 212 just blank on that. Yeah, it was 14% was just blank on that.
You know, I mean, that happens in a primary, we mentioned. So the turnout for this primary in general was fairly low. Across the state, between 15 and 20% of registered voters actually came out to vote. It's tough to get people to come out and vote for a primary, especially one where there's not a big top of the ticket race happening. There was, you know, if maybe Howard Dean or Murrow Weinberger were on the ticket, maybe if somebody was significantly challenging Bernie Sanders for the Senate seat or Becca Balint for the U.S. House seat, then we might have seen a higher turnout, but none of those races were particularly competitive, so we didn't see a very high turnout in general. And you know, even when folks do come out and vote, they may not know the hyper-local candidates, and so they may say, I'm going to vote for Bernie, and I'm not going to fill in the rest of the bubble because I don't know who the rest of the people are.
Yeah,
and that's why we exist, Drew.
Yes, yes, and you know, actually, speaking of which, I think this is a really great time to remind Vermont voters that voting in Vermont is super easy. Mail-in ballots are very easy to get. You can register on the day you go to vote, which is something that, you know, I think we should take pride in the state of Vermont. But I'm a mail-in voter, and so you know, I had voted months, you know, like a month before any of this had even done, and I think a lot of people should start mail-in voting. That could bring, it's a very low barrier way to do more democracy.
It's true, and we should also mention that in Burlington and Winooski, we have all resident voting.
Yep.
So folks who are here who are not U.S. citizens can still vote in local elections as well. And we did see, and that's also same day registration. I went to the polls yesterday and I asked, you know, where can I take a look at if I was a first-time voter, what were the forms I would have to fill out? They gave me 2 forms. They said, here's, you know, the all legal resident voting, and here's the registered Vermont voting if you're a citizen of the United States. And so both of those are options to register on the same day at the polls.
That's great, and that's something to be really, really happy about, really prideful of.
Exactly. And so I think, the last thing we should mention here, we don't have a clip for this either, but the Burlington School Board has a new member. I think we had a special election in Ward 3 particularly, and Latasha McDonald, who is one of our friendly neighborhood crossing guards, has joined the school board, and we will hope to hear more from her on the Burlington School Commissioner's Corner. And we know the Burlington School Board has a lot on its plate with a new high school coming up in the next couple of years, and a lot of, frankly, challenges with running a high school out of a mall.
Yeah, and transitioning for students is really difficult. Transitioning not just from home to high school, but from home to high school to a brand new high school, it's going to be a lot. And I think that the school board is going to have, it's going to be very important. And so I'll be excited to see more shows that we have about the Burlington School Commissioner's Corner. There's going to be a lot to talk about. I think it's going to be really interesting.
Yeah. Not to mention property taxes, funding education.
Yep.
It's going to be on the top of the list for the legislature come January. So all these folks that we talked about, senators, legislators, the lieutenant governors, the governor, all of them are going to have to get together and come up with a new way potentially to fund our schools.
Yes, and it'll be interesting to see how we do that with where the supermajority ends up. It will be interesting to see how much can get done should that power shift.
Exactly. So a couple minutes left here, Drew. I guess we should wrap up.
Yep, I think it's been great being with you, Bobby. I've had a lot of fun doing it.
Yep.
So I want to say that's been our recap for the primary election. Thank you for tuning in. You can watch Town Meeting TV's election coverage on our cable channels, Comcast 1087 and Burlington Telecom 17 and 217. Or you can go to YouTube, youtube.com/townmeetingtv, where auto-generated captions are available. You can find also highlights from all of our shows on our Facebook and Instagram feeds. If you want to contribute to our local elections and coverage, we're currently hiring 3 part-time field producers. We are also looking for students to join our media election team. You can find more information about the jobs we're hiring for and our election team at cctv.org. Forums for the general election will start in early September and run through October. Town Meeting TV will host a TV elections results show, same as we have here, on Tuesday, November 13th at 7:30 p.m. Be sure to find us and check our schedule online at cctv.org. Thank you so much for joining us today.